is a whole moment in time that exists of all these different factors, subject matter, the point in time, the context, the photographer's perspective, what they thought was happening themselves, what they thought about the issues they were photographing, that all leads to the photograph but aren't necessarily captured within the photograph. Photography isn't just a photograph, but it's actually a movement of information and opinion from one position to the next.
Let's put the power to those people and let them tell their story. Give them the power to tell their stories by providing that platform, a free platform. Most of the things that we see on a daily basis are political and controlled in somewhat, especially from photojournalists coming out of a war zone. When's the last time you saw blood in a newspaper? Probably never, yet there's 2 wars going on that we're both involved with.
For social change to come about, it's a big issue, and it's not going to happen through magazine publications or exhibitions. You know, that's something different. That's informative, but it's not really going to affect change. I think for that to happen, you've got to work, you know, closely with NGOs. I wanted to be there to make a document of what was going on. I wasn't there on assignment for a newspaper or any organisation, so I was totally independent. All I can do as a photographer, and all I try to do, is be truthful, be honest. But photography is innately your take on things. It's your personality coming out in your pictures. There's no such thing as a robot photographer who doesn't bring their opinion to the table when they take a picture. And you know, simply by going to the east of Libya, I was on a side. I was on a particular side. I wasn't photographing the other side. I couldn't once you made that choice. Taking a picture, you know, the act of taking a picture doesn't make any difference in what, it's what is done with that picture in the end.
The photographer's skill, experience and heart should be at the service of the message. For instance, if we're aware of the photographer or of the skill in which they've used in order to make the photograph, then I think that detracts from the message, and also it might make it harder to affect the change that we want to have happen. We need to believe that what we're looking at is real, that is a faithful reporting of only that which is present. In order to look, to see what's there, and have a genuine response to what we're seeing.
What we're really focusing on, I think, as artists is actually lies rather than truth, and that we're always trying to explode lies that we perceive are being over-promoted somehow to the public. I think my definition of truth is actually an image that is trying to promote truth or hold on to the truth. It's an image that allows the continuation of debate, of change, and allows a continuation of communication of issues around change, rather than, because I think because we attack so often like government line, I think what we're trying to do is always try and break open spaces that they've shut down somehow.
I suppose in some sense there's a little bit of exploiting the fact that people are so reliant on images being strong, memorable, as aesthetic pieces, that you can take them out of context and people still recognise them.
There is such a vast amount of imagery that we have seen over the course of photography's existence that has become so repetitive, and particularly around conflict and suffering. The images that are kind of constantly peddled to us through the media are almost falling on deaf ears now, because we've seen it so much. It doesn't really have much of an effect. It's called compassion fatigue. It's very important when you're photographing something that's been already documented very heavily to avoid the obvious and to try and do something different. Otherwise, what's the point? What's the point in churning out these pictures constantly?
And perspective from the photography side compared to the fundraising side, compared to the campaigning side, it's a very messy situation. And the thing is that a lot of things have changed, and we really must show the new world, the world that we're living in now, rather than one which was imagined several decades ago. And the problem about lazy photography is that it is easy to do. You don't have to think about it, and you're just simply copying what exists. You're replicating existing work. which perhaps had its place and was very effective at that time, but is no longer so. I think all the evidence shows that there is a fast fall-off of response to that kind of photography. Perhaps there would be an initiated spike because of a natural care. You know, people are shocked by what they might have seen and want to help in some way, but it does fall off very quickly. The sort of photos that I'm very proud to be part of very often. There's the sort of thing that Will Storr took last year in Uganda about, it's a rape story. That story changed UN policy. I think that's the thing that we should aim for. We're trying to change things. It may not be on the ground. It may be a policy somewhere in an organization somewhere. The world is a really complex place. We can't simplify it. But at the same time, we can't keep seeing it the same way as other people. So.
The basic human needs, from food and water and shelter in these areas, you can get a relationship with anyone across the globe. A lot of these stories and images everyone can relate to. So we try, and when we're educating our photojournalists, we say, well, okay, let's, like with Libya, and a lot of photojournalists going in photographing the conflict and then they left. What was the doctor's story that had to, you know, how did the doctor take his child to school through a minefield every day? Focus on the doctor, and then everyone in the world go, well, I take my child to school every day. Oh, that guy has to go across a minefield as well. It kind of opens it up a little bit, but everyone in the world can relate to it, and it can. I don't know the answer.
I think there is this conflict of fundraising versus well, truth, really, as we're saying, because there are a lot of adverts out at the moment which we haven't really seen, apart from a few organisations, haven't really seen the kind of photography that's being used now and for the last couple of years since the financial situation got so bad. Haven't been really around for, I would say, about 10 years. Certainly I hadn't noticed their prevalence as I am now. And it is the harsh financial climate, the fundraisers, I feel, are starting to, their priorities are starting to take over. And I think it's interesting to consider why you're actually putting that photography out there, and whether NGOs in particular, for example, have a role of doing more with their campaigns than actually getting the money in to carry on their good work, and I'm sure it is good work, and whether actually it's important that people have a three-dimensional and more truthful, representative view of what the issues are, and not only just the issues, but actually what the context is, what the you know, what the doctors as well as the starving children are actually going through day by day.
Research before on the issue just helps the story move along a lot quicker and touch a lot more. You can tell, really tell when someone hasn't done their research on, and you can see the images on a story, on a really, because they're not close enough, they're not opened it up a lot, and you can see that, and that needs to be educated on to citizen journalists and amateur photojournalists more, to affect social change. What shapes on a day-to-day basis people's lives. People look at the news daily and themselves, the big things, and rather than the small things, unfortunately, sell better. It's not that I don't agree with it or not. It's but that's what we want. So those things about the issues with food and water in a country, or violence to one another, shelters being blasted out of the ground, all these things are more likely to be going into those newspapers to try and affect social change or to raise fundraising.
I think in terms, I think it's really important to start trying to believe in other ways even before you even know what the way is. So maybe intangibles, and that's what I mean by intangible, and that maybe the reproduction of the same old stories and the same old subjects is actually just a reinforcement of the very oppressive, whatever it is, whether it's a system or a state.
I think subtlety in some ways liberates the subject, liberates your way of thinking, so that you don't just produce what's assumed, what's expected. You might therefore have a variation of what is true, and it comes through various other things. I'll just throw in another word, and that's uncertainty. I think someone mentioned it or was leading towards that a little bit, because that's equally important. And I think they work very closely to each other, and in some ways that's a counterbalance to an arrogance, which is that you know what's there, a sort of certitude, and that's really arrogant. And I think that to allow a certain amount of uncertainty, and also to allow a certain amount of subtlety in your work.
Looking for an image that people are already going to know what to think when they see it. And that's a perfect example, because if you only see that final photograph, you just don't know any of what came before it.
What's going on around it as well.
Exactly,
yeah.
The context is deliberately
edited.
Sometimes I was photographing things that were only happening because we were there, and it took me a while to realize that there was a difference, and if you were going to be true about it, if you were going to be honest, then you had to be very aware when something was happening for real, and it wasn't just happening because you were there.
The whole of the photojournalism that came out of the Vietnam War changed the industry, and changed perception in the whole of America. So probably could be debated whether it stopped the war. I think it definitely was a catalyst in some regards. Most of the celebrity photojournalists in movies are, they're quite iconic. You got the guy from Apocalypse Now, and it's though that kind of America just stopped it at that point. This is controlling this war in a way. All these images come back because it's affecting social change. That all the protesters are on the streets. The newspapers are all up in arms, are all against the government, and all this other thing. So you could see correlations with that with Libya, because there was no American or British troops on the ground, so they couldn't control. You didn't have to get a writ to be based with them. It was pretty much an open playing field for them to go about and go along with the rebels and all these other stuff. So it was quite similar. Same with Haiti as well in different ways. I mean, that was just overkill.
There's two very important decisions you have to make as a photographer. That is, when to click that shutter and where to stand in relation to your subject. We all know that. I'm not saying something no one knows here, but that you do have times when a group of people are brought in, and something horrible is going to happen because of your presence. Obviously, it's a choice. You have perhaps a minute to decide.
Truth is, and reality is actually a moving, uncapturable thing. The nature of it is you can't capture it, and so, I mean, the whole notion that an iconic photo is in some way related to truth or able to be a messenger of truth, I think is maybe wrong.
A photograph, a still image, a static frame, can itself contain truth is very much it's actually a dangerous myth.
Yeah.
I think that's what's come across,
Yeah.
and it can be misused as a myth. And it's actually more important, whether it's by subverting these kind of very strong myths that we disagree with, or whether just by trying to find a different perspective. But I think the most important thing is actually for the photographers themselves not to believe that myth, and to invite debate around their imagery rather than one specific reading of it.